All right, welcome back to the Northstar Method podcast, where we give you the mental skills to be at your best when it matters most. My name is Sebastian. I am the co-founder and CEO of Northstar Performance Psychology.
And I'm Sean, Director of Mental Performance.
On today's episode, we are diving into the science of the vibes. What are they? Why do you feel like things are negative or positive when you walk into a conversation or into a team meeting? How do people get the momentum or give it away in games or in interviews or in other crucial moments? The truth is that the vibes are a lot more than just a feeling. There is a psychology and a neuroscience to the way that we perceive how other people are thinking and feeling, and the way that we communicate our inner experience to the people around us. If you can get a good understanding of the science, you can have leverage over these factors that so many people think are completely out of their control. That being said, what is your experience with the vibes? Have you ever noticed in work with clients or in your personal life the influence of the vibe on performance?
Definitely. The first thing that comes to mind is one of our captains on our high school football team. If we were down at halftime, you knew it, even if you never saw the scoreboard. If you were walking into the locker room, you were walking on eggshells before anything was even said, and you knew this guy had something to say. But it was evident before a single word was said, which was always interesting to me.
Yeah, and so there is this nonverbal sort of factor to how we perceive one another. And you might be familiar with the term micro expressions or nonverbal communication. You hear a lot about how body language can influence the way that people feel about you, and therefore the outcome of those interactions. How do we actually know that there is a positive or negative vibe? Is there like a neural circuitry? Is there a physiological sort of hardware component to sensing the vibes?
There certainly is. And there's a lot of studies that show it actually. I've got a couple pulled up here. The first one, probably the earliest one that kind of shed light on this phenomenon, was a study by Rizzolatti et al. Out of the University of Parma. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that name. But it studied the effect of what we call mirror neurons, which are nerve cells in our brain and our nervous system that kind of activate the same way as we see other people doing. So what that means is like mirror neurons fire both when you act as well as when you watch somebody else act. So if you are throwing a football or you're watching somebody else throw a football, the mirror neurons, the same neurons that activate that image, are still kind of going haywire in your nervous system. They discovered this in monkeys and later confirmed it in humans, but these mirror neurons explain why we unconsciously absorb other people's body language and tone and facial expressions. It's kind of the biological foundation for empathy, mimicry, and also what I like to call vibe perception. So the perception of somebody's vibe, like the guy, my high school football captain. I could perceive his vibe based on his micro expressions, based on just his energy, because the vibes he was putting out were quite negative. And I was able to sort of, I guess, feel that through my empathy pathways, through my mirror neurons, and pick up that tone and that tension before I consciously interpret it.
So what I'm hearing is there's literally a part of your brain that when it observes other people's mental and emotional state, it sort of mimics that state within you. This is not something where you notice, hey, this guy's upset. You say to yourself, maybe I should be upset. This happens way before you can even verbalize your perception or your understanding of the situation. So that means that even when you're not paying attention, these neural circuits they're constantly scanning and detecting what the vibes are. And this sort of vibe perception phenomenon is this like ongoing computer program always running in the background.
Yeah, that's actually interesting that you say that computer program always running in the background. Because our nervous system is constantly scanning for things, like no matter if we're trying to or not. And unfortunately, these things are often danger or threat. and we're trying to get to safety. Another study from Stephen Porges, it was studying polyvagal theory, and which is essentially just about nervous system safety and like your energetic presence. But it found that like this phenomenon called neuroception, which is that scanning for safety or for danger. Our brain, our nervous system is constantly in this state. And if it's in a negative state, like we've talked about, it can be perceived. Hopefully it's in a more regulated state, a more calm, like trustworthy energy, because as we've talked about, the perception of the vibes, we can really feel that. And it's actually a term called co-regulation. And co-regulation ideally is done from somebody who portrays like a regulated state, a calm, powerful, sort of composed energy. But unfortunately, co-regulation can work in both directions. So whether you're in a spiked, unregulated state or a calm, regulated state, they can both be perceived by others. So it's all about like, what am I portraying in that sense?
So your nervous system is always scanning the environment. It's always picking up on cues, whether you are consciously perceiving them or not. Broadly speaking, there are two poles that your nervous system could lean towards. We could, for this purpose, call that like regulated or dysregulated. So you could be angry, you could be excited, but if that's regulated and controlled, then that's the state where you can use that and channel that to your advantage, as opposed to being angry or excited or sad in a dysregulated state, which is where our mental and emotional experience is kind of ragdolling us around. We're not so much in control of it. That explains a lot about how vibes spread. So vibe perception is always going on. And clearly when you talk about like the case of a football captain or a leader in any environment, this could be work, this could be a family, whether or not that influential person is able to regulate their state has a cascading effect on all of the people around them.
Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of goes to like, how do we regulate our state? There's a lot of answers to that, but I want to talk about another study that I found. Talking about this idea of coherence. And if you've ever heard the term heart rate variability or HRV, if you wear like a wearable, an Oura Ring, a Fitbit, whatever, you've probably seen this measure, this HRV measure. Heart rate variability is a measure of the nervous system's like flexibility, its ability to adapt and just kind of be resilient in certain situations. And ideally, you want to be in the state of coherence, which is a synchronization in your heart rate, your breathing, and your brain function. A state of coherence, when you're in like a fully regulated state, it improves focus, it improves composure, decision-making, and even emotional regulation, which means when you're in coherence, you perform better, you make clearer decisions, and you radiate the energy that you want to radiate. They also found things like it boosts reaction time and things like that if you're going to lock into performance in that sense.
So quite literally, there is a physiological state that you can be in where you are optimizing your reaction time, your ability to respond and to react to things in the environment. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that when you're regulated, when you're in a coherent state, you have better access to critical thinking, to information processing in general. So this state is clearly, like you said, conducive to high performance. And that could matter in a high pressure situation like a 2-minute drill when you're trying to go down and win a game, but also to day-to-day life. How many times have you gotten in a situation where you had a conversation that was a little bit heated and later you had thoughts of what you could have or should have said to have made it better?
Every shower I ever take.
Yeah, it's hard. It's such a common phenomenon that you hear like, yeah, you know, I had an argument and then later I realized like, oh, I could have won if I had said this.
Mm-hmm.
The point is that you don't have to wait until after the game, so to speak, to access your best. You just have to learn to put yourself in the right state at the right time. And that's what self-regulation is all about. It's about understanding the different states, what it feels like for you, and then being able to influence that in the moment, which if you've been with us for a little while now, you know is the whole point of the Northstar method to help you identify those states and shift to the ones that you want to be in.
And there's a lot of insight here for team and group cohesion, especially like with leaders. So there's this whole idea of emotional contagion, right? As this ripple effect amongst teams, amongst groups. The idea here is that emotions transfer non-verbally, like we've talked about, through like micro expressions, even posture, body language, voice. And they're socially contagious for the same reason, because these vibes, these vibrations are energy waves. So these subtle emotional expressions can then shape a group's entire mood. So if you are a leader or a team captain, or it's something that you're trying to be, you kind of have to think about how you're showing up. Am I showing up as this composed, confident, resilient leader who wears that? And hopefully that kind of spreads throughout the group. Or are you nervous? Are you anxious? Are you worried about the perception of others, which we now know can be very well perceived through our empathy circuits? So, I mean, that's a whole other conversation and like a whole other deep dive, but food for thought as to like, how am I showing up? How do I want to be perceived? And how do I want my team to feel?
Now, on one hand, it sounds like common sense to say that you want to pay attention to the energy that you bring to your interactions. But I think the caveat here is that you don't always have to be in a good mood to have a positive influence on the vibes, right? Like there are situations where stuff is difficult. Like your team just suffered a huge loss, or you're down at halftime, or somebody that you're close to is going through adversity or loss or grief. Your job is not necessarily to spread a positive vibe and lift everybody out of where they are. It's just to deal with the emotions of the situation in a way that is coherent. So could you give examples with your experience working with athletes and artists and performers of how somebody could show up in a difficult situation and influence the vibes in a good, healthy, productive way, even though the vibes are bad or they're not feeling good?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing here is acceptance that things can go wrong. And that, you know, if you're a leader who's a positive energy, kind of like that's the contagious part of your vibe, understanding that that might be kind of difficult if things aren't going the team's way, and kind of having a mental game plan for that. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? And what am I going to focus on to actually enhance the team's vibe? A lot of times it's picking up others if they've made mistakes, but it's also like demonstrating resilience. A big thing here is body language. Like there's studies that show proper body language, you know, chest up, chin tucked, shoulders back, releases hormones that influence confidence, that influence even resilience. And kind of hunched over, slouched, like you're in a kind of cowardly position, you're kind of like submitting. Even these things are contagious enough. So it really just takes the awareness and being mindful of leading by example and kind of going through the plan there of like, how do I want to show up? What do I want to do to enhance the team's vibes when shit is kind of hitting the fan?
So we have established that emotions are contagious, that the vibe is something that you are constantly perceiving, and that if you understand this, that you can take control and influence the vibe in a positive way. What are sort of the main tools or pathways for influencing the vibe sort of within yourself and then consequently externally? And I'm thinking of, obviously there's like thoughts, self-talk, how we frame the situation.
Sure.
But then there's like the downstream effect of that, as you mentioned, the biological reaction to your thoughts, like the hormones, the neurotransmitters that are influenced by what you say. What are some of those like sort of pathways that people need to be aware of so that they can take advantage of them?
It's a really interesting question, and there's not a perfect answer. This is where coaching is very important to see like what fits best for each individual. Short answer is getting into a regulated state before whatever kind of leadership you need to do. So like, let's say you're down at halftime. We'll use this example for the episode. If you were to not even have that much belief in your ability to come back, but you know that your role as a leader is to influence the team to do their best, you have to check your state and literally taking a moment to recognize, okay, what state am I in? Am I going to act like I'm not going to win this game? How can I get back to this state where I'm portraying the traits and the characteristics that I want to? So it might be a breathing exercise before you give a speech to a team. It might be grounding before you go back into the conference room or whatever it might be. But really, I mean, I always recommend certain breathing exercises. Box breathing has been shown to be very good at like regulating your nervous system, at decreasing that sympathetic response. Whatever kind of reset routine gets you into that sweet spot of composure before you have to kind of influence others is definitely a routine that you should be mindful of.
So everybody needs to have some way to check in with what state their nervous system is in, and then to understand where they want to move it and have tools to move it in that direction. So it sounds like if you are going to a conference room, maybe this is an earnings report and, numbers are down, people are going to be disappointed. You are already anticipating a negative reaction.
Yeah.
You are in a dysregulated state. And before you even speak, you're going to influence everybody in that room to be in that negative state as well. If you develop a routine to where you can check in with yourself and say, okay, I notice that my thoughts are characterized by blame. I noticed that my breathing is really shallow. It's in my chest and not in my diaphragm.
Big one.
I notice that I don't even believe that I can turn the vibe around in this room. In order to have this go the best that it can,
give yourself the best chance, right?
You check in with yourself and you decide, in order to get to the state I need to be in, what exercises do I need to do? We mentioned box breathing, which for those who don't know, it's essentially breathing equal parts in, holding at the top, out, and holding at the bottom, usually 4 or 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
That is very scientifically grounded in evidence and shown to bring your HRV up and shift you into a more coherent state. Mm-hmm. So we have box breathing. What other techniques do you think people could use or try to make their sort of custom reset routine?
Good question. So a big part of resetting is the regulatory part, right? Like regulating your nervous system. I usually will give like a tried and true breathing exercise or a breathing technique that has been shown to work, such as box breathing. 4-7-8 breathing is a great one as well. For people that are averse to breathing and they think, hey, I know how to breathe, just not well enough. There are other things such as progressive muscle relaxation, which if you're unfamiliar with that, it's kind of picking a muscle group. So let's say it's like your arm. So you were like squeeze your fists as hard as you can for 10 seconds. We're to contract this muscle group fully for 10 seconds and then fully release, fully relax for another 10 seconds. This works to regulate in a different way. It regulates your blood flow, takes it away from your mind, goes to the muscle actually. It also gives you an awareness of tension versus relaxation, and also the focus on like the timing and the feeling activates your frontal mind, your frontal lobe, and deactivates this like default mode network where we're in neuroception, where we're always scanning for this threat. We're kind of grounding by doing this. When we can ground, when we can breathe, and we can bring ourselves back to this sweet spot of composure, this is where we find it's easy to make decisions. We're in a regulated state, things fall into pieces a lot easier that way.
So 4-7-8 breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 7, exhaling for 8, box breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. These are just a few of the tools that you can use to try to regulate your state. And you get practice at this. So if you start trying to notice what state you're in, you might do it once or twice a day. But the more that you practice it, the more often this notification comes up in your mind automatically. So the best leaders The best leaders in sports, in business, in their families are people who consistently check in with what state they're in and consistently shift back to where they want to be. I would wager that the people who get the best results in life are the people who are in the state that they want to be in as often as possible. So that being said, obviously changing your state in the moment is important. What about cultivating a certain state over time? Like, obviously some lifestyles are more conducive to being in the right part of your nervous system more often than others. As we know, in today's day and age, we live in a world that is constantly dysregulating you. It has never been easier to get dysregulated, to get angry and lower HRV and, shallow breathing, because you're getting notifications on your phone about something happening all the way across the world. And you're worried about what's going on at work and at home. And what can people do to live a life that promotes a regulated state more often?
This might not be the easiest answer, but it really is finding what works for you and finding what puts you in that state. A big one, and I'm sure if you're an athlete, you certainly can relate to this. I certainly can, is music, right? Like, music is just frequencies and vibrations, and certain frequencies and vibrations hit you differently. So let's say you're an athlete. I'm sure you have like a hype up playlist, a pump up playlist. I certainly have songs that I go to, that get me in the right state for things. Aside from just like the act of listening to music, I guess I'll admit this. I do like to sing, and it puts me into like a happy state, and it makes me feel good. So like before we recorded this podcast, I was singing. And before I'm going into the gym to rehab, I'm singing to get into a happy state. And I noticed yesterday I was rushing and I didn't, and the workout was kind of boofed for that reason. So kind of that's just an example, finding these activities that like make you feel in the state that you want to feel for the activity that you're about to do. So whether that is just positive self-talk or just whatever other actions, dancing, movement, we do find that there is like this phenomenon called entrainment, which is synchronization during like music and movement. So essentially, music, breath, and movement naturally synchronize people's physiological rhythms, their breathing, their heart rate. This is called entrainment. And your breathing and your heart rate naturally adjust to the external rhythm that it's provided. So if somebody's dancing, if somebody's singing, if somebody's playing a guitar, you're going to naturally vibe to it, which if you've seen a music performance, you've probably done. But they've found from this study from Bernardi et al. 06, they found that teams that walk, breathe, and move in sync often experience what we call higher collective flow. So able to work together better, they're able to communicate better, and make better decisions as a group. So it's very interesting. So there's not an easy answer. I guess I should say there's not a perfect answer. It's really just whatever works for you or your team.
So in order to build a lifestyle that promotes the state that you want to be in more consistently, there are a number of factors that could help, and it's up to you to test them out and find what works for you and your team. That's sort of your secret sauce. And that's something that we spend a lot of time working with clients on, is just helping them get to know themselves and developing those routines so that they have them for the rest of their lives. And these are things that can turn over a lot, right? You can enter a new era of your life where maybe you live in a different time zone, or something about the rhythm of your day has changed. And so being able to adapt your routine, also, this goes for teams as well. When there's new coaching regimes, when there's new leadership and new players, the culture changes, the rhythms change. Being able to adapt these routines to promote the right vibes for everybody quickly is the make or break difference between whether or not they can be at their best. And you mentioned the power of music and the effects of entrainment. If you needed any more proof that music is an extremely powerful tool for regulating your state, it has been shown that when orchestras play together, their heart rates, breathing rhythms, and HRVs sync up. And this entrainment doesn't just happen in mass groups, it also happens in one-on-one conversations. If we strap on a heart rate monitor to you and I right now, we would notice that the more that you look into each other's eyes, the more that you pick up on those cues that your mirror neurons are always scanning for, the more that you sync your state. And so it's up to you to use music, to use breathing, to use self-talk, whatever tools you have to move towards the state that you want to be in. And again, it can be the make or break difference between choking or having a clutch performance. You also mentioned flow. When we see people get into these states where they say, time just wasn't even a factor. I didn't even hear the voice in my head. All I was focused on, I was completely merged with the task at hand. This flow state is something that you can slip into more easily when you're in a regulated state in your nervous system. And so for a lot of athletes, something that we work on is building a pre-performance routine that promotes a regulated state so they can slip into flow faster, which means your opponent is still thinking about what to do while you aren't even thinking. That's how you beat them to the spot. That's how you anticipate their next move. That's how you almost start reading minds, is when you get into that flow state.
You start to be like water, if you've heard that quote.
Yeah, I think it's Bruce Lee. Seriously.
Yeah. And like water doesn't react. I forget exactly what the example is, but like a water flowing downstream, if there's a rock in the way of the stream, it doesn't like react to it. It responds by kind of diverting path and flowing downstream. When you're in a flow state, I mean, there's like, I want to say no pun intended, but it's just so intertwined that it has to be intended. Like you're flowing like water. You're responding to whatever the environment provides you because you're in a regulated state. You're not worried about the future, the outcome, the past, whatever. You're just right here, right now, able to respond to whatever is given to you. And that is the state that you want to be in on the field, in the boardroom, in the studio, whatever.
So by this point, people can clearly see the power and the depth of the state that they're in on their performance, on their relationships. But it's easier said than done. Even though we're telling you about these tools, sometimes we forget to practice them. Sometimes they just don't work as well. Sometimes we're so far gone in a dysregulated state that we don't even wake up from it for days, weeks, sometimes months on end. I'm going to give you some scenarios that are common sort of dysregulated state situations. You describe what you would do if that was your client to help them learn how to get out of it quicker.
Sure.
So the first thing that comes to mind is everybody has been either like on an interview, a date, a phone call where it just started off bad. Like maybe they got out of the wrong side of the bed. Maybe the person that they're talking to has some preconceived notions about them that are negative. And there's this like feedback loop where you notice their expression, you start getting disappointed, you tell yourself this isn't going well, and it like spirals. There's literally momentum in the negative direction, in the interaction between your thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Yes.
What do you do to start spinning the wheel in the other direction?
The biggest thing to start is to break the chain of that direction. So like you said, it spirals, kind of like it starts to go into this negative direction. It's like a feedback loop. Feedback loop implies a loop, a circuit. You want to break the circuit. This is through, a new thought that kind of goes into the counter direction of the thought process they were already in. So I'll try to give an example. Let's say it's like, this is already going terribly. Maybe a more like a thought that would stop that chain of thought would be, it hasn't started great. It's time to recover. And so that would influence feelings of, kind of motivation, kind of confidence in your ability to actually take it back. It's accepting that, okay, shit's not going well right now. What can I do that's within my control to redirect this energy? And I know it's not really a simple answer. But I would say just being aware that this can happen and having an idea of how to sort of break that chain, whether it's through a thought or just through redirecting your focus. I like to say this thing to my clients. It's, I'm feeling blank because I'm focused on blank. So like, I'm feeling nervous because I'm focused on what if I mess up or something. Really, we want to get into the feelings that we want to feel. I want to feel blank, so I will focus on blank. So I want to feel composed or regulated or confident. So I'll focus on my breath for a few seconds and kind of tap back into the present moment. And then I'll focus on the play that I need to run right now. or something. So kind of like realizing that what you're focusing on and how you're thinking about the situation is influencing the feeling, influencing the outcomes as well. How do I break that chain? A lot of times it's through just a shift in focus.
So changing the momentum essentially comes down to breaking the chain. You have to notice the interaction between thoughts, feelings, and actions. So I think this is not going well. I feel uneasy. My heart rate is going up and my speech is starting to sound shaky, right? Mm-hmm. Thoughts, feelings, actions. Break the chain. Maybe you do it at the thought junction. So
ideally it's done at the thought junction.
Okay. So the thought, that's maybe where you have the most leverage, depending on the situation.
Because, and sorry to interrupt you, but like in terms of like the thought pattern that leads to an action, there's always a stimulus in the environment that causes a thought. So like something happens, maybe it's a closed gate, maybe it's a make or break interview, and that's going to cause certain thoughts. The thoughts then influence the feelings, and then the feelings then influence the actions or the performance. So if a thought is, oh shit, I'm going to mess up, or if this doesn't go well, I'm broke, whatever, you're going to naturally feel like in a survival state. You're going to feel less regulated, more nervous, more anxious. And those anxious feelings, those nervous feelings are going to influence your actions. You're going to be contracted. Your breathing isn't going to be ideal, and that's not going to allow for ideal performance. Now, you want to associate the stimulus with a more helpful thought and stop it, like you said, at that thought junction and kind of redirect that. So maybe it's the same stimulus, tie game, high pressure, make or break interview, and you think something like, I'm about to go in there and make this my bitch. Or like maybe it's something not so like highly confident, but it's more practical. It's a thought that influences better feelings. It influences maybe feelings of confidence, of composure, or of just rationality and like presence. But like, yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but the thought junction is the key junction to think about here.
So essentially you want to have these like go-to phrases, and you may have heard about affirmations, right? I think it's something that people think is like kind of woo-woo.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of utility to it. And so if you can get these phrases that mean a lot to you about how to switch the momentum, like, you know what, it's not going well, but I'm the guy who can turn it around, or whatever it might be. The more you use it, the more effective it is. So when you break the chain once, you start to notice when that cycle happens again in the future. And the better you can be at becoming aware of the cycles that you typically get into, the more often you'll be able to break them. And over time, you'll actually switch the default from the negative reaction to the positive or helpful response. One thing that we talk about all the time is the difference between reaction and response.
Mm-hmm. Can I give one more analogy?
Yeah.
That's perfect for this. So I'll often tell this to people who are struggling as to why do I think this way. I give the name analogy. So I'll do it with you. Your name is Sebastian. If after this podcast, you were to go walk down the street and somebody yells, hey, Sebastian, what do you think you're going to do?
Turn around, look.
Yeah, obviously. You're not going to think, okay, time to turn around and look. It's like...
Or you just have a thought.
No, it's this. Like, it's turn around and look. It's because it's 25 plus years of being Sebastian, and you know if someone's yelling Sebastian, odds are they want your attention. I'll turn and give them my attention. If you were to change your name right now to Sean, I don't know, some other name, and you walked, and the podcast ended, you walked down the street, but someone still yelled, hey, Sebastian. Probably still turn and look, right?
No, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
As you change your name at 9:17 tonight, it's not going to set it. That's because of the repetition of that response. The repetition of, okay, if someone says Sebastian, I'm turning and looking. I bet over time, if you were intentional about it and you were like, no, I'm Sean now. I'm not going to respond to Sebastian. I'm going to respond to Sean. Eventually, you'd stop responding to Sebastian and start to respond to Sean. You'd be more intentional about your response. This is kind of how the mind works. It's through like stimulus and the repetition of the response. So if you can be intentional and aware of the response that you want when the stimulus comes up and practice that, you'll eventually get there.
So what I'm hearing is mental skills have a reverse tolerance. That means the more that you use them, the better they work. Because at first, you have to remember to do it. But over time, due to learning and neuroplasticity, what used to be an intentional response becomes a knee-jerk reaction. And so we can't always be aware of what state we're in. Even when you practice it, you're going to get busy, you're going to get distracted, and you're going to slip up. But if you train mental skills, then you replace your knee-jerk reaction with an intentional response. Over time, even when you're not paying attention, you'll just automatically do the right thing. And that's why we talk about sets and reps. And that's why we talk about doing these things repeatedly in a routine, just the same way that you train physical movements. You wouldn't go out and kick a field goal in a game if you had never done it in practice and expect it to work. Mental skills are the exact same way. You know, it's funny that you mentioned the name example, because this literally happened in real life. So like a week or two ago, it was your birthday and I went to go pick up food that you ordered.
Oh yeah.
And it was in your name. So I'm standing in the restaurant, just like looking at my phone, and they start yelling out, "Order for Sean." And I'm like, just sitting there like, oh shit, and so
that's the food I'm picking up, the person for it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, if I, in theory, I changed my name to John to pick up this order and I, you know, didn't even respond to it.
You wouldn't even know.
That's why people get so discouraged with this stuff. Like, a lot of times mental skills sound really simple. It's like, yeah, of course I'm going to do that. But so many people know it and they don't practice it enough for it to actually matter. So they might know they changed their name to Sean, but they still don't react to it immediately. They have to make an intentional response, which takes energy and willpower. And by the end of the day, your willpower runs out. Everybody has a set amount of willpower. This is related to a bunch of hormones and neurotransmitters, including dopamine. At the beginning of the day, you have a full gas tank and you're more able to notice, oh, I got distracted. But towards the end of the day, you know, you run out of power and you start reverting back to your old reactions. And so a lot of what we do and a lot of the Northstar method is getting people to download the reactions that they want to have so that they're automatic, so that no matter how tired, how scared, how hungry they are, they still do what they want to do.
A great example of what you were saying about like the skills and not being super successful versus meditation. If you've ever tried to meditate, I guarantee you were like, I'm not good at this. And a good meditation teacher will tell you that your mind is going to wander. You're not going to be able to focus on your breath for 15 minutes the first time you try. It's like you're not going to be able to kick a field goal in a game the first time you try. Your mind will wander. The idea behind meditation and like mindfulness in general is to notice when your mind drifts and then accept that, acknowledge it, and gently redirect your focus back to the present moment, back to that anchor for your attention. And your percentage, your accuracy is not going to be good at first. It never is. Think about like if you play a sport, the first free throw you shot versus free throws now, or whatever the example is. Like it takes time to build these skills, but they're like, it's so tried and true. They're so able to be built.
The future that we see, the reason that we started this company, there is a world where everybody trains mental skills the same way that they train physical ones. Because people train physical skills, there are people who can help out in accidents, lift a, car off of somebody, or, first responders who can be brave and rescue people. The fact that people train physical skills means that we have incredible athletes to watch and be inspired by. It means that people can make incredible music and dig deep into vulnerable emotions to make art that we can all relate to, that helps us process our experiences. We can have those same exact benefits on a mental level if we all train mental skills. So we envision a world where people are all more aware of their state, which means less people cut you off in traffic. It means less people argue in the comments on Instagram. It's a more constructive conversation, although we know, the algorithm likes its outrage.
Yeah.
We see a world where people encourage each other, where they lift each other up, where they believe that they can do things that they never thought they could do before they started training. And so mental skills are important, yes, for elite athletes and for your favorite artists. But they might be even more important for the day-to-day person, because a world where everybody is mentally fit, where everybody has good mental performance, is a world where we all do more of what we want to do, where we all get along better than we're getting along now, where we all think and feel better than we do today. One last topic that I want to touch on before we go, binaural beats. So
Yeah, I was waiting for this.
yeah, personally have been using binaural beats for over a decade now. And like most people, when I was in college, caffeine, pre-workout, any other way to stay focused, and get through those tasks that you didn't really want to do, that was on the table. Fast forward to today, like this, I never thought, like, I barely drink caffeine, because binaural beats work better for me. So can you talk a little bit about what binaural beats are, how they're related to entrainment and to the vibes, the vibrations, and how people might be able to use them?
So it's funny that you mentioned this, and you might even have more insight than me on this one because you've put me on to binaural beats. Was it today when I was researching for this episode? It was kind of later at night. I was done seeing clients, and I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna put on a binaural beat, see if there's any height to this. I think I YouTubed like binaural beats for focus. I had not been this locked in since like grad school, maybe. It has to do with like the wavelength and I guess the frequency behind the binaural beat. So like certain types of waves, like for focus, I believe that beta waves are the optimal kind of wavelength for that. For calmness, it's alpha and theta waves, that combination. And forgive me, I know that I don't know anything about this, so if I misspeak, I apologize. And for creativity, it's like theta and gamma combination. So the actual wavelength and the frequency behind these beats is kind of what influences the emotion that you want to have. It's a legitimate performance tool. Frequencies don't just change your mood, they like change your mind.
Yeah, they don't just change your mood, they change your mind. What a binaural beat actually is, it's two different frequencies, so 2 different hertz playing in each ear. And the idea is that the average is sort of what your brain settles at. We've been talking about states of your nervous system being regulated or dysregulated. One of, if not the main characteristic of the state you're in, is the brainwaves that you're experiencing. And we measure brainwaves for scientific studies. We use them in exercises such as neurofeedback. Your brainwaves are associated with basically how awake or how asleep you are, to put it very simply. And so when you choose binaural beats that bring your brainwaves up or down, that influences your state, whether you want to be more focused, more calm, meditative, or even help you get deeper sleep. We are working on putting custom binaural beat formulas and playlists within the Northstar app, which is coming soon. But for now, you can find some pretty decent ones out there just on YouTube.
That's what I did.
I even like to put them in the background of music. They're especially effective if you meditate with them before. So if I'm trying to get into deep work, what I'm going to do is 5 minutes, eyes closed meditation with the binaural beats for focus, and then put it at like a 40% behind the music volume, and then choose music that's good for focus too, which this goes back to the theme of you got to figure out what works for you. So get your hype playlist, get your focus playlist, get your calm playlist, and then pair binaural beats with those playlists to boost the effectiveness of how these sounds regulate your state. That is one of the simplest, most effective, quickest things that you can do to get an advantage in terms of self-regulation.
So you're saying I can put on a binaural beat behind Lose Yourself and feel more pumped up than if I just listened to Lose Yourself by Eminem?
Well, that's one of the most hype songs that there are out there, but
should we do a study on this?
Hey, maybe we get Northstar Frontiers research.
Oh, maybe we do. I'll be the test, the guinea to this one.
So it is abundantly clear that when it comes to the vibes, whether that's within yourself, your one-on-one relationships, or teams or groups that you're a part of, they are not something that is just left up to chance. You have an opportunity to influence the vibes in the direction that you want if you learn mental skills and apply them at the right time. If you can have self-awareness of the state that you're in and have tools to then self-regulate towards a state that you want to be in, you can control the momentum of the vibes in your life, at your work, on your team, and anywhere that you go. This is going to make you a more influential, powerful, and inspirational person. It's going to help you be in the state that allows you to react faster, process information, and learn better. and ultimately build a much more fulfilling life where you reach your potential. If you're interested in learning more mental skills that can help you regulate your state and influence the vibes, give us a follow at Northstar Method on Instagram, where we're constantly posting clips about these mental skills and giving examples of how people train them.
And if you want to learn more about this or any other sort of mental performance related topic, drop a comment, shoot us a DM, or an email if you're so inclined.
Yep, we are always on the lookout for what you're interested in, and we're happy to do a deep dive into the science for you at any time. We want to thank you for tuning in to the second episode of the Northstar Method podcast. If you got anything out of this, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Like it, comment, anything you can do, no cost to you to support the channel. We've got new episodes coming out every single week, wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.
Till next time.